is if you can show that we are arguing on the side of the public interest, not on the side of a self-interest. The third one is maybe controversial, but I think it's important to talk about, which is you think of later in King's speech where he talks about, I have a dream that one day little white children, little black children will join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual. Right? And that people will be judged not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. But the key part of his argument was that those two beliefs are linked. Is that the very fact of people of different races sitting down and playing together and working together and going to school together is what leads to a system in which people are judged on their merits and not on their color. And I think that is a problem that we did not finish in the civil rights movement. Look today at the data that's out there, and I don't have to tell this crowd, but it's astonishing to know that still almost half of black students in this country right now go to schools that are more than 90% black. Right? In my book, I tell the story in Greenville. It's not different than other parts of the world. In Greenville, Mississippi, you can walk the hall of the yearbook photos, essentially from the 50s up until today, and you see an all-white school from the 50s up to the 1970s. And then you have Brown, and you have busing, and you have forced integration, and you see from the 70s, or the 60s to the 70s, that get much more diverse until it's about 50-50. And then in the late 70s, 80s, 90s, you see those numbers drop off again and all those schools resegregate. And here's what's important for this room to know, because I went to the Delta like a lot of folks thinking, gosh, they sure got it messed up down there. Why don't I just go down and see how bad it is in the Delta? I had the good fortune of marrying a Southerner who set me straight on that. But the thing she set me straight on is if you look at the census of the 10 most segregated cities in America, I'll tell you right now, not a one of them is in the South. They are all north of the Mason-Dixon line. And 5 of the 10 are within about 2 hours of where we stand right now. So this is not an Alabama problem. This is not a Mississippi problem. This is a New York and a Connecticut and a Denver problem. And so the question becomes, what would it take to actually drive integration as a priority? But here is why it matters, because I believe what we've had is a system where we allow people to triumph based on the merits, which is if you are an outstanding person of color, you can succeed on the merits. But that is an individual solution to a systemic problem, right? Which is part of the way that, that life works, is it is about networks, is it about friendships, and it is about loyalty, right? And you know, I think that merit helps. Merit earns respect, but friendship earns loyalty, right? And let me tell you one story. So I think one thing we have to think about is what is our role as a movement in actually driving the end goal of integration? And what you'll look at if you look at some of our highest performing schools right now, we talk a lot about this idea of the great 90-90-90 school. And what is that? It's a school that's 90% low income, 90% kids of color, and 90% proficient. And we have held that up as our dramatic success. And it is a dramatic success because we're incredibly beating the odds in those places. But that puts our exemplars in the category of schools I described 2 minutes ago, which is the 50% of black kids in the country who are in schools that are 90% black also. So the question is, how can we as a movement begin to think about places that are both incredibly high quality and that are representative of the population of kids that we want them to work with for the rest of their lives? In Denver, there's a school called the Denver School of Science and Technology, which is a tremendously high-performing charter school. But part of their core mission is they could fill their school with 100% black kids or 100% Latino kids or 100% white kids, because they have a waiting list from all 3 places. But their very intentional mission is they are 30% black, 30% Latino, 30% white in a city that has those same demographics. And the purpose is, what they want to do intentionally is to say, we want not just to have a high-performing place, but to have a place where kids of different backgrounds actually do the work together. So we're not unintentionally perhaps recreating the old notion of separate but equal, which is we'll create you a great educational opportunity. It will just be a separate one. And let me tell you a story from yesterday about why I think this matters. So we had a debate yesterday on the floor of the state Senate in Colorado. There are 2 major bills this year in the Colorado Senate that are going to tear our Senate apart. One of them is civil unions, and the other one is a bill that I'm running to allow undocumented students in the state of Colorado to have access to in-state tuition. Whole separate talk, but I can tell you that running a high school where I had kids walk onto the stage to pick up their cap and gown and their diploma and give me a hug and look me in the eye and say, Mr. Johnston, why did you have me do all this when you know I can't actually go to college? Profound, profound problem. The valedictorian of my high school this year is undocumented, will not go to college next year because she can't pay 5 times the rate that the salutatorian will pay to go to the same in-state school. I'll stay off of that track before I get too far. But here's the point. Two bills. One, in-state tuition for undocumented kids. 2, civil unions. The Democrats control the Senate, the Republicans control the House. We have to find Republican votes on in-state tuition to pass it. They have to find Republican votes on civil unions to pass it. We have not called up in-state tuition yet for a vote on the floor because we can't get the Republican votes yet. Yesterday, civil unions got called up for a vote. I was proud to vote for it. It was an amazing day. And it passed with 3 Republican votes. And every one of those 3 Republicans came to the microphone, tears in their eyes, incredibly moving stories, and talked about members of their own family who were gay. Talked about members of their own family who they had lived with and looked in the eyes and said, of course I love you as much as I love your brother who's straight. The purpose is, we can argue all we want about the policy importance, and I have tried it on undocumented students. There is none of those 3 senators who has in their family an undocumented student. At the end of the day, the policy argument is powerful, but loyalty and friendship and your own experience is stronger than any policy argument is going to be. It's not until, and actually one of the Republicans which came up told the story not about having a gay family member, but about having a sister who was in an interracial marriage. It was that personal exposure to difference that made her believe this was the right thing to do. The place where I think you see this debate most profoundly on the national stage right now is look at the federal commitment to the funding of special education versus the funding of at-risk education. The U.S. the U.S. Congress and the U.S. Supreme Court have essentially said, and superintendents know this, no amount of money is too much to spend on any special needs kid. No amount of money. Because we have an absolute obligation to serve those kids and serve them well. What if we made that commitment about kids who are behind grade level? What if we said no amount of money is too much to spend on kids who are behind grade level? Why don't we? Because special education status is equally distributed across the population. Every U.S. senator has someone in their family who has a learning disability. There's not anyone in the U.S. Senate that I know of who has a family member who lives below the poverty level and is a person of color. So when you talk about the impact of background experience on political power, what you see is that those experiences fundamentally change the way we make policy. So integration is not a goal just because I think it makes for a more enriching life for all of us, or that if you looked at Bob Herbert's piece yesterday, that it has some good data around what it benefits for low-income kids, but because you won't get to structural change until you have a lifelong sense of partnership. That means when the chips are down and you're asking someone to buck their party or to buck their friends or to buck their neighborhood, they're going to do that. They're going to lay down in traffic for people who they've lived with and grown up with and played sports with and gone to college with. They're not going to do it just for a good idea. Last topic, then I'll close, which is what does it mean for us to, and so the integration one I don't think we got right yet. I think the original movement, we did messaging very well, we did coalition very well. The things we didn't get right we have to learn from now are the question of integration, and the second is the question of how do you make lasting change. And here I think the story I'll tell from the civil rights movement is you think about Rosa Parks, a story we all know. Think about the moment she stood up and she made this heroic stand. And you think that changed the nature of the bus boycott, right? It's not the case. What changed the nature of the bus boycott was that on Monday they decided they would call a one-day boycott, and they did. That night, a number of the leaders gathered in a church and said, our work's not done yet. We have to keep doing this. And then for 390 days after that, nobody rode the bus. I mean, for 390 days, people like Janelle McGrew who you never heard of. She had a car. She was one of the folks who had the responsibility and the benefit of having a car. So she every day for 390 days made it her job to get 40 people to and from work, and to get them to and from errands, to get them to and from the bank. Because not riding the bus meant not just not riding it to work, it meant not riding it ever. And she got thrown in jail for it. They knew she was a shuttler of people. So they found her and threw her in jail. She got out on bail, and the next day picked up her 40 people again. The point is, I think we fall prey to the fear that the moment of catalytic change is the act of a heroic political movement. We were done when Brown versus Board got decided. We were done when the Voting Rights Act got passed. We were done when the Civil Rights Act got passed. When the reality is, lasting change only comes not when Brown was passed, but in the 14,000 districts in America that spent the next 30 years figuring out how to implement Brown. And that's at the local school board meeting, that's at the local school board meeting subcommittee on student assignment plans that meets Tuesday at 9:30 in the morning that nobody can make. But those are the meetings in which the actual plan to figure out where kids get to school gets made. And if we believe that it's only the heroic moments that make the change, you never actually drive the long-term moments of lasting change. And that, I'll just say quickly, is what we're seeing right now with the implementation of our Senate bill. People are delighted about the policy that we passed, and that was a great thing. The moment when all the people were gathered there on the Senate floor for the final vote was a great day. But where this bill will live or die, if it's going to change the practices of kids, is right now in a basement committee room in the Department of Ed, a council of 14 people are meeting to define the measures of teacher effectiveness. I spent last night writing my testimony for them this morning because, with all due respect to you, what I say there is going to have a bigger impact than what I say here. But none of us is there right now. We think at the moment of heroic change, the work is done, and then you move forward. And so I'll close by saying I think of Rosa Parks and Janelle McGrew, and I call them first liners and last liners, which is, if you think about the Declaration of Independence, we always think about the first line, which is, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all are created equal. And it took a man of incredible vision and genius to write that line. Right? But the last line is, in order to protect this declaration, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. The last line is what Janelle McGrew lived. The last line is, every morning I'll get up 2 hours earlier so I can get in a car, pick up 40 people, get them to work, and get home, and I'll do it thanklessly and tirelessly and quietly for 390 days until I break the bus system. But we can't survive on the first line alone. We will need, as a precondition, the big policy wins to start the work going, but without the folks to be able to be on the ground, making the work happen every day, we won't actually ever get to lasting change. We'll get moments of heroic change without a change in the actual experience of kids.